Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Greg Watkins, Executive Director of BCCT. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar with two eminent professors giving us an update on COVID-19 and a broader scientific understanding of the vaccines that are currently in play during the pandemic. I'm grateful to both Nicks today for they will be introducing themselves, and if you would like to pose questions, could you use the Q&A or the chat buttons at the foot of your screen and type those in, and we'll come to that at the end of the session. So it's my great pleasure to hand over to first Nick White, who's a professor of tropical medicine at Mahidol University, and then he will hand over to Nick Day, also a professor and director of the Mahidol Oxford Tropical Medicine Research Unit and of the Wellcome Trust Thailand, Asia and Africa program. So without further ado, over to you, Dr. Nick White.
Thanks, Greg, and good afternoon, everyone. Brief introduction to us. We are tropical medicine researchers. We're based in the University of Oxford in the UK, but we live and work here in Southeast Asia, based in Thailand. I chair the Wellcome Trust supported Southeast Asian tropical medicine research programs. We are physicians. Both of us are consultant physicians in Oxford, and if COVID wasn't with us, we would be on the wards once a year for 1 or 2 months, looking after people with acute general medical problems. We do research on a variety of infectious diseases before COVID, particularly on malaria, nasty bacterial and viral infections. And now during COVID, we do quite a lot of research on COVID itself, and we're conducting, in fact, the world's largest trial of COVID prevention. So without further ado, let's get on to our talk. But first, perhaps a disclaimer, and we're not giving medical advice here. We're just simply presenting the information to you. And the information is all generally available information, but I know it's very confusing because often there are too much rather than too little information. So next slide, please. Briefly, we'll chop this up into epidemiology, which is how many cases, where are they, what's going on in the world. Then something very important to us all, which is what vaccines are there, where are they, and what do they do, and then a brief discussion of drugs. Next slide, please. So this is the WHO website as of 2 days ago, and as you can well read, there are over 200 million confirmed cases, but emphasis on confirmed cases because the majority of cases certainly in low and middle income countries are not confirmed, and certainly in large and populous countries such as India, the vast majority of cases are not documented. There are over 4 million deaths, so this is now second to the Spanish flu in terms of impact on global mortality. And as Nick will describe to you in a little while, about 4 billion vaccine doses have been administered, way below what is needed. Next slide, please. So the recent history, COVID has fluctuated, as you all know, quite widely and wildly, and its progress has not been well predicted, to be honest. Thailand was actually the first country outside China to have documented COVID cases, and at the beginning of last year, we thought that Thailand would be badly hit, but as you know, it wasn't. And in fact, it was Europe where things really kicked off, in Italy, and then subsequently very badly in the UK, and then in the US, and then in Latin America. And we've had a series of waves for various reasons, which we could discuss later. But in the last month, or the last 4 weeks, actually, this is the global distribution of where COVID is particularly affecting countries. And Thailand is, as you can see, in the fairly heavily affected cases. These are, again, just to re-emphasize the documented cases. So whereas the data from resource-rich countries, such as, say, Australia, probably reflect very accurately the total burden, there are countries, much of sub-Saharan Africa, for example, and South and Asia and Middle East, where documentation of cases is significantly underestimated. The next slide will show you the mortalities. Next, please. So next slide, please.
I am trying. Sorry, for some reason it's stopped.
Well, I'll keep talking. So mortality.
There you go. There you go.
There we go. Thanks, Nick. So again, it's very heterogeneous. Again, you can see that, for example, Ecuador, Namibia, Tunisia, badly affected with a high proportion of their population, or a high proportion of the population having fatal infections. And again, Myanmar really is massively underestimated. The impact of COVID is really bad there, and very, very few cases are documented, but it's pretty clear that mortality is high there, as it is in the Southeast Asian region in general. So Southeast Asia and South America and Southern Africa particularly badly hit at the moment. Next slide, please. This is just another way of representing it. I don't know if you can see the bottom of that, but you just focus on, look at the substantial increase in deaths in the East Asian region compared to everywhere else. Next. So what is the evidence? You are bombarded on an almost hourly basis with information through all media outlets on COVID. It's very rare that a news goes by without some mention of COVID, but it's really quite difficult to digest all this and to really understand what's going on. Next, please. So there have been an unprecedented amount of research. There are thousands of clinical trials that are being conducted, and many more planned. There are an enormous number of reports of varying quality in the scientific and medical literature, which are then passaged through the lay press. There are claims for just about everything that might work. And of course, there are always people who adhere to these minority claims that they have some inside information, or they have knowledge that the rest of us do not have, that something works. And it's really quite confusing. It's even confusing for us professionals. So it must be very difficult for people who are not in the business, so to speak, to try and figure out what's right and what's wrong, what's true and what's false. Next. So this is the way that evidence in science, in medical science here, is looked at, and you have this pyramid of evidence where what should be an increasing quality. But you start with people's opinions at the bottom, which can actually be very valuable. And in Asia, that's a particularly powerful source of policy. Is the expert opinion. And then you have a variety of forms of clinical studies, of which the best, or the gold standard, so to speak, is the randomized controlled trial, preferably blinded. That is the best source of information. But because the outcomes are so variable, these trials need to be very large. And the largest trial in the world, randomized controlled trial in the world, is the UK's recovery trial. And it's that trial which has given the majority, not all, but the majority of the medical information as to what works and what doesn't work. But it's a hospital-based trial. So this is for people who are already sick enough to be admitted to hospital. And we do now know that several medicines will reduce mortality in hospitalized patients. But somebody's got to judge all this. Next, please. And the lay press is torn between sober acceptance of uncertainty and much more newsworthy high profiling of extravagant claims. Next, please. So some basic facts about the disease before we go on to what you can do to prevent it and treat it. The incubation period is up to 2 weeks. The median is 5 days. And 97.5% of cases will have symptoms within 11.5 days of exposure to the infection. I know you're all washing your hands and worried about surfaces and so on, but the predominant route of transmission is through respiratory droplets. Now, these are of varying size and they can hang in the atmosphere, which is why enclosed spaces are particularly risky from the point of view of COVID. The other important point, next please, Nick, is that that most people will recover without adverse effects, but 1 in 20 will go on to develop serious disease, and 1 in 50 people will die. Now, the risk factors for dying are, as you almost certainly know from reading the newspapers and listening on television, are that if you have underlying comorbidities. But the single greatest risk factor is your age. I'm acutely aware of this, being 70 years old. So age, comorbidities are the major risk factors. But as you also know from reading the newspapers, now particularly in high-income countries, the vaccination coverage is improving. We're still seeing a lot of people of all ages being who get sick. Next, please. And over to Nick. One more point before I hand over, sorry, to Nick, is that about 1/3 of cases is thought, it varies quite a lot, are asymptomatic. In other words, the person, they may feel slightly off color, but they're not ill enough to present to medical attention. So I'll now hand over to Nick.
Thank you, Nick. So I'm going to talk briefly about the famous variants and then go on to talk about vaccines. So SARS-CoV-2 has done what all pathogens do, and that is it's evolved, it's mutated. This, I don't think this took the scientific community by surprise, but it seems to take a lot of the world by surprise. And what has been surprising is how quickly the new variants have spread. That they have mutated, become fitter, better at transmitting. This is just Darwinian evolution. And so they've taken over very, very quickly. The WHO have got it's not so new now, but a scheme which we've all got used to, of calling these variants after the letters of the Greek alphabet, which is better than saying the South Africa variant or the UK variant or whatever. Generally, they're split into 2 groups: the variants of concern, which are the ones which are worrying because they transmit faster or maybe escape from vaccines. And then there's variants of interest, which people are keeping an eye on, haven't quite got enough information to put them into a variant of concern category. At the moment, WHO recognizes 4 variants of concern. That's alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. And then the other 2 here, epsilon and iota, are variants of interest. And there's 2 others in eta and lambda in the WHO ranking at present, which are variants of interest. So, and as you can see, they vary in terms of transmissibility, in terms of immune evasiveness. That's how well they can evade the immune response, either from a previous infection or from vaccination. and or at least when you do the experiments in the lab. But the good thing is that vaccine effectiveness on the whole has held up for all of these. More about that a little bit later. So vaccines. Now there's been a magnificent global effort to develop vaccines for this disease, which is unprecedented in the history of humanity, as you're all well aware. And I mean, I can't emphasize enough how remarkable this has been. So this is just a summary. This is from McGill University, who track vaccines in development. And you can see that just in a year and a half, they've got 138 vaccine candidates. That means vaccines that are about to be tested or being tested. Over 400 vaccine trials, 59 countries involved in these. This is all in the last 18 months, going from 0 to 200 miles an hour. 21 vaccines have been approved, at least provisionally, in one or more countries. Actually, the number which you would have maybe heard of and a kind of mainstream is about 10. There's quite a few which are only registered in the country in which they've been developed. And countries have variably authorized which vaccines. So this is the number of vaccines that each country has authorized. And you can see that the US is 3, UK is 4, Thailand is 6, and Hungary and the Philippines is 8, because they're really going for it. And there doesn't seem to be too much rhyme or reason about which vaccines are authorized in which countries. A lot of the mainstream vaccines are widely authorized, and obviously there's a bit of sort of nationalism when you've got a local vaccine that has been developed, even if it hasn't been shown to be effective in large trials. Anyway, so what about Thailand? Thailand has been actually pretty mainstream about the vaccines that are approved for use. So you'll know all of these. There's two RNA vaccines, mRNA vaccines that have been approved, Moderna and Pfizer. There's 2 viral vector vaccines, which use adenoviruses which can't replicate to deliver the genetic material. And that's the Johnson & Johnson and the Oxford AstraZeneca. And then there's 2 inactivated. This is a very traditional, old-fashioned way of making vaccines, sort of proven, but not necessarily as effective as the modern vaccines, vaccine technologies. But they are effective. They do work. That's Sinopharm and Sinovac, which are inactivated vaccines. And as you can see, all of them have been approved in at least 30, 40, 50 countries. And interesting that leading the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine has been approved in 121 countries, which is the most of any vaccine. So that's the current, that's not necessarily available, but this is what has been approved by the Thai FDA. If you look around the world, you can see that there's only a few sort of fairly mainstream vaccines that account for most of the doses that have been given so far. That's obviously the Oxford AstraZeneca, Pfizer, BioNTech, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna. Novavax is coming online as well, which is a slightly different technology. And the others tend to be, a lot of them are inactivated vaccines. In China, that's mainly the various Chinese vaccines, which are a variety of technologies, but a lot of it is the Sinopharm and Sinovac. So how are we doing in terms of vaccinations globally? So this is the World Map of Vaccinations. Again, this is from this is from Bloomberg. There's lots of really good sources of information out there. And as Nick said earlier, 4.5 billion doses have been administered. So if everyone has 2 doses or 1 dose for the Johnson & Johnson, that's enough to cover under 30% of the global population. That's not enough. And you can see that it's very heterogeneous, the vaccination coverage. And Africa has done very poorly. A lot of other lower middle income countries have done poorly in terms of having access to vaccines. So Thailand, as of 2 days ago, 21.2 million doses administered, is now 21.7 million doses, another 500,000 yesterday. And that is enough to cover 15.2% of the population if everyone gets 2 doses. In fact, it's just under 25% have had 1 dose and 7% have had 2 doses. But that's just so that the number can be compared, 15.2 compared with the global median of 29.4 above. And this is how the rollouts have looked. You can see this, that rollouts have been pretty fast in some countries. Israel, obviously not a particularly big country, but they did very well early on. The dark blue one, which has lost its label, is the UK. And you can see that Thailand is catching up, playing catch up at the moment, and its rate is ramping up too. So I mean, they're now vaccinating about 500,000 shots a day, fewer at weekends. If they can sustain that and sustain the supply, then that'll obviously be excellent. But do they work against the variants? So that there's some high quality data on this, or reasonably quality data on this. This is summarized in this graphic from the FT. And it's from England and Scotland, and from Israel and Canada. So the original worrying one was Israel, so it's the Alpha and the Delta variant. That's the percentage efficacy against symptomatic infection. Does it prevent symptomatic infection? And as you can see that Pfizer, the efficacy dropped dramatically when the Delta variant swept through Israel. Much more reassuring information from England and Scotland with much smaller drops, and actually quite high for Pfizer, and a little lower for AstraZeneca. And you can see that the dotted line, which is if you've only had 1 dose, you can see the importance, this is from the UK data anyway, of having 2 doses for the variants. You need 2 doses for the vaccines here, which is pretty much all the vaccines apart from the Johnson & Johnson. And in Canada, there's actually been some really good data from Canada, and it's very reassuring. You can see that AstraZeneca works as well against Delta as against Alpha for 1 dose, and Pfizer doesn't seem to be affected very much at all. So that's against symptomatic infection. But actually what we really want to know, what all of us getting vaccinated for, is to stop us getting seriously ill, needing to be hospitalized, possibly ending up on a ventilator and worse. So this is the important thing, which is the efficacy of these vaccines against hospital admission. So this is against severe disease. And you can see that it's really reassuring that these 3 vaccines at least are holding up. Unfortunately, for other vaccines, there's not so much data, so we can't say. But certainly for these 2 mRNA and 1 viral vector, the AstraZeneca, it's not bad. Again, 2 doses better than 1. But even then in Canada, if you've had 1 dose of AstraZeneca more than 14 days ago, it protects, is 88% protective against severe disease. So that's pretty good. So that's the upside of a vaccine. Of course, the downside everyone worries about is side effects. These vaccines are all safe. They are, compared with other vaccines, we've got really good data on them, and they are as safe as other vaccines. There are some very rare side effects like the cerebral venous sinus thrombosis that you get with the AstraZeneca, and this is about this here. This is just showing that what the risk is of having that. It's roughly 1 per 100,000. That's getting not dying of it, but getting this serious side effect. And you can see that it's slightly more common in younger people. And then if you balance it up against the potential benefits of ICU admissions due to COVID-19 prevented, obviously younger people get less disease less severe disease than older people on average. And so you can see that there's a sort of a crossover point. This is the AstraZeneca vaccine, about 40 years, which is why in the UK they decided not to give AstraZeneca to people under 40 and to give Pfizer instead. If you're just, of course, that's the other option is to give another vaccine. But more about that in a sec. This balance, though, it depends on how much COVID is around. And this graphic here is for low exposure risk. This is based on a coronavirus instance of 0.6 per 10,000 per day, which is what the UK was back in April. It's gone up since, but and that was when the decision about the Pfizer for young people was made, around about then, just before then. So what about if there's high exposure risk? Well, then the balance is completely different. It's really in favor of the vaccines. So this is based on coronavirus instance of 20 per 10,000 population per day. That's, as it says at the bottom here, roughly the UK at the peak. Thailand at the moment is about 3 per 10,000 per day, so a lot more than 0.6, less than 20. However, of course, that's for the whole country, and there are hotspots. There will be areas where transmission is many parts of Bangkok, for example, where transmission is probably as high as 20. And of course, it's always underreported everywhere in the world because it relies on you being tested. But you can see that the benefit is very, very much in favor of having the vaccine if there's a lot of COVID around. However, you might say, well, why not just have Pfizer or Moderna, where you don't have this risk of clotting? But actually, although you don't have the risk of clotting, there are other complications. In Israel, they discovered that Pfizer causes inflammation of the heart, myocarditis, particularly in young people. People mainly recovered, and but it was more common than the clotting, and on occasions people died. So this is now, and this has been confirmed in the huge studies that have been done in the US, where they've been vaccinating people over the age of 12 with Pfizer. Again, balance still for young people is in favor of being vaccinated with Pfizer. So the point here is that these vaccines are all safe, and we've really got so much information on them because of the nature of this emergency that we're spotting the very rare side effects that all vaccines, all medications, all activities in life have. And people tend to overestimate. I mean, 1 per 100,000 is actually very, very small. And people have made comparisons about driving, etc. We're very bad at being able to estimate and sort of think about risk in our day-to-day life. Okay, so that's vaccines. What about drugs? Well, so far, and this is about prevention and early treatment, there are no drugs that have been shown to prevent COVID-19. So far, there's no evidence, no good evidence that ivermectin works. It might do, but the trials haven't been done. There's also no oral drugs that you can take easily that have been shown to treat early COVID-19. So just when you start becoming symptomatic and you want to nip it in the bud, there's nothing that's been approved for that, nothing that's been shown to work so far. However, that's for all drugs. You can give what is generally referred to as a cocktail of monoclonal antibodies against COVID. And one such cocktail, it's actually a cocktail of just 2 monoclonal antibodies, is Regeneron, which you may have heard of. This is the one that Donald Trump got when he was sick, when it was very experimental. And that has been shown to improve outcomes. And actually that's been licensed by the Thai FDA last month. I don't know much about its availability or its cost, or whether it will be widely deployed, but it is licensed in Thailand. So I guess our message, which I'm sure we're preaching to the choir here, is you just need to get vaccinated. And I was really pleased to hear that the BCCT is trying to help the community out with getting access to vaccination, which is really wonderful. So on that note, I'll stop and we can move over to I'll hand back to you, Greg.
Thanks very much indeed, both Nicks. As you can guess, there's a huge number of questions already in the Q&A, and I'm sure there'll be more coming in. Let's kick off, if we may, with Adam. Okay, it's a specific question here. My family lives in Thailand. We've all had COVID in April. Do you suggest we take Sinovac plus AstraZeneca or wait for an mRNA vaccine, as is our preference?
Nick, do you want me to take that, or?
Okay, I mean, waiting is uncertain, so it's a balance. You've heard the data. My inclination is to tell people to get whatever vaccine they can as soon as they can get it, because you really can't be sure when you will get the promised one, which might be a bit better.
And I agree with that. And despite they do have some effort. They are, all the vaccines that we have in Thailand do work to varying degrees. So the vaccine you can get is better than waiting in general.
Okay, thanks, gents. A question on the fatality statistics. What are the true numbers of COVID deaths, i.e. died solely of COVID rather than died within 28 days of a positive test? What's your sense there?
It depends. I think we're on the jurisdiction, but in general, most in the UK, for example, most people who die within 28 days of having a positive COVID test do die of COVID. It's been shown. I mean, obviously, a lot of people are old. You could say that they may die of something else. They're certainly more likely to die of something else, but tipped over the edge by COVID. And in the UK, they worked out that the average person who died of COVID, they were losing 11 years of life on average. So even though lots of old people were dying, people say, "Oh, they're going to die anyway." Actually, it works out that people were not that ill necessarily or disabled, and on average, in the UK, it's 11 years of life that you lose with each death from COVID. I think it was defined like this: within 28 days of a positive test. So I think the true numbers are that most of them have died solely of COVID. But of course, you're right, it won't be 100%.
Okay, from Chris. In the UK, the gap between first and second vaccination is 8 weeks or less. In Thailand, it's 12 weeks. Is there a case for speeding up the second jab here, or is it simply a case of availability?
The evidence such that it is that waiting longer may be better. Of course, it's a balance. You get better efficacy with the AstraZeneca if you wait more than a month. And the first study, they had a group which waited between 8 and 12 weeks. It seems that the longer you wait, the better. And subsequent studies looking at antibody levels also show that if you wait 12 weeks, you get a higher antibody response than if you wait 8 weeks or 4 weeks. However, of course, while you're waiting, you're not as well protected. So that's the balance. So you have to keep yourself safe in the meantime. So I think what the UK did initially, which was 12 weeks, and what Thailand's doing now is completely reasonable and in line with the evidence. Of course, you could make you could make the case people who are high risk of being exposed that the trade-off is such that you want to be better protected with the second dose earlier. But I think that the policy here is reasonable. So I've had one dose and I'm waiting the full 12 weeks. I'm quite happy with that. What said. Anything more to add, Nick?
No, I'm also waiting.
Okay, likewise. I think this is a really good question from Priya. Could you please introduce us to some good information sources out there? I mean, we are, as you both said when during the presentation, we're bombarded with stats and information. Are there any particular sources that you as scientists see as the most reliable?
Shall I go with that? I'll kick off.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
So the WHO website is actually not that friendly, to be honest, is reasonable, although some of the things they've said we don't agree with. I like The Economist has got some fantastic stuff, Financial Times and the major news outlets. Nick?
Agreed. The Financial Times has been superb throughout. You've got access to that. And there are some university websites which are very good in terms of getting information on the numbers. The Johns Hopkins site for how the epidemic is or pandemic is going, and for vaccines, the McGill site. Bloomberg have also got some very good information about COVID generally. So I think that all the reputable mainstream media, I shouldn't use that term, sites are pretty good. I found the most useful is the FT. Economist is good too.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Jen. So Priya and Robert have both asked if the presentation will be made available. Yes, you can access this from the British Chamber website, bccti.com, and there'll also be an audio recording available as well. Quite a long question from Jason relating to mixing different types of vaccines. And he's been double vaccinated with Sinovac and hoping to get an mRNA booster. First question, how safe is it to mix 2 Sinovac with 1 mRNA booster? And the second question, how long should I wait after the second Sinovac before I get the mRNA booster?
Unfortunately, there's not a huge amount of data on this. There is information on AstraZeneca followed by Pfizer, which is a very sensible thing to do. There is not a lot of information on Sinovac followed by Pfizer or Moderna, but it's been done in Thailand, and I think it's a sensible thing to do. I don't see any reason a priori why it shouldn't be safe. I think it's a good policy. And in terms of how long you should wait, in Thailand you have to wait if you're going to get. They're giving a third dose to frontline medical staff who've had 2 doses of Sinovac. They're giving either Pfizer or AstraZeneca, but the rule here in Thailand is you've got to wait at least a month. In general, with this, it seems that with this prime and then boost, so you prime the immune system, then you boost it with another kick. The longer you wait, it's not unclear what the optimum time is, but waiting more than a month with AstraZeneca, it seems to be 3 months, even 4 months. Seems to be better in terms of how much boost you get once from the primed immune system, if you leave the gap between the prime and the boost. So you say, Jason, you say from my research, there are some sources that say 3 months, others 6 months. I think both those are reasonable. I'm sure that the reason why they're not agreeing is because the information isn't, that the evidence isn't there.
Okay, a question from Matthew that I can probably answer. I've been told the UK and EU do not accept the Thai manufactured AstraZeneca. Is this true? I mean, we've had to answer several questions on this and have engaged with the UK government, and the point on this is in relation to quarantining and how you quarantine when you go back to UK. And certainly at the moment, the UK is only accepting vaccinations delivered during the UK programme for quarantine-free access to the UK. And we know, and we have evidence of this from many people who have been through the process, while Thailand remains an amber country, you can quarantine at a home in the UK for 10 days when you're subjected to 2 tests, but you can in fact buy yourself out after 5 days if you take an additional test and are negative. So irrespective of the vaccine that you've had, EU rules, I'm not quite so sure, Nick. Is EU the same?
I think you'd have to check. It varies a lot. I know that I suspect that they're probably requiring vaccines that are actually licensed in their particular country. And of course, the EU is heterogeneous. Hungary, for example, has licensed 8 vaccines, including Russian ones, but others haven't. So there probably isn't. It'll depend on the individual country rather than an EU-wide answer. Okay,
the other thing I should mention, in my contact with our colleagues at the embassy here, they have emphasized this is a rapidly changing scenario. So keep if you are going to UK or thinking of going back to UK, keep consulting their website gov.uk, where they will have updates. And the situation, if UK designates Thailand a red country, it means quarantining in hotels rather than quarantining in your home. So that's quite a big jump should that happen. Moving swiftly on, Michael, I think your question regarding Sinopharm and then an mRNA booster has already been answered by Nick. And I think, Jan, your question about practical safe to mix vaccines, different manufacturers, I think that's pretty much been covered already by Nick. We had one question offline from John at Move Ahead Media. I mean, are there any good foods, drinks, or anything you can do if you do come down with COVID that's, that will help you get through it more than others, perhaps?
That comes under drugs. I'll leave that to you, Professor White.
Most kind. The honest answer is no. There is nothing. No matter how skillfully marketed or traditionally approved or whatever, really nothing. Paracetamol for fever and whatever makes you feel, whatever gets you through, but there is nothing yet for which there is unequivocal evidence of benefit. Unequivocal is an important word because there are loads of reports claiming benefits for many things. Favipiravir, for example, there are small trials suggesting benefit, but they are not convincing. Over.
Okay. Any last questions people would type in? We have an interesting one from James, who says, "I am still confused about mask wearing. Is it effective?" And I hope that's not in direct reference to an instruction that came out on social media a few days ago, James.
Nick, your turn.
Yeah. Mask. I think that the evidence that mask wearing is effective is high, especially indoors where there's a much higher risk of transmission. One thing we should say is that if you're vaccinated and you catch Delta, which you still can, but you're just less likely to be symptomatic and much less likely to become very ill, it seems that you can transmit it just as much as if you weren't vaccinated. That information is coming out sort of day by day and becoming stronger day by day. Delta is very clever. It's acting more and more like the common cold. So it's producing very high concentrations of virus particles in your nose and what have you. And so it's very infectious. CDC reckons it's about as infectious as chickenpox. And if you're vaccinated and you catch it, which you can, you are just as likely to pass it on as if you're not vaccinated. So So masks do work, and please be careful if you have been vaccinated not to feel, well, I'm not going to get it, it's fine, I'm not going to be at risk to anybody else, and no one else can be at risk to me. There's quite a lot of information about wearing double masks, and I haven't seen really clear evidence that works, but it seems a sensible idea that's being pushed at the moment. And certainly it's in the US, those who are believers believe that it's a better thing to do. There's a good study from Thailand done by one of our colleagues looking at the early stages of the first outbreak, looking at boxing stadia and the nightclub cluster from Tonglo, and that looked at risk factors, and masks were very protective in that, stopping contacts getting infected. That, of course, is with the original variant, not with Alpha or Delta, not the original virus. But it was very clear that masks were very effective.
Okay, a couple of last few questions. Robert, I read in early 2020 that ibuprofen is a no-no for COVID. Is this true?
Nick?
No, it's not true. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, of which ibuprofen is the most widely available and probably has the best safety ratio, they do have some adverse effects, more than paracetamol, but there's no reason not to take it.
Okay, that's clear. From Richard, can we still take seasonal flu jabs without any issues?
Yes, and you should.
Okay, fantastic. We're whizzing through here as people are typing them in. Similar questions, I guess, from Chris, one of our international school headmasters, and John about getting back to normality. Projections seem to suggest this Thai wave peaks in September and may recede through October. I guess a lot of it's down to the pace of vaccination. Schools open by Christmas? Question mark.
Big question mark. The mathematical modelling, as you quite correctly say, suggests that this current wave will peak in September. But crystal ball gazing has not been very successful in general, even with the help of mathematical modelling during the last 18 months. So I wouldn't like to say, but it's a possibility. I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely, I do too. I think John's question: when do you think things will get back to normal? I think you pretty much answered that.
2024.
Yeah.
I mean, really normal.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing as well. Okay, this is an important one. Based on timelines internationally and knowledge of how things work in Thailand, when might we reasonably expect approval for under 12 years of age to be vaccinated? And maybe if I can add on under 18s here, as that's the current cut-off point here in Thailand.
Yeah, I mean, so the under 18s thing depends on the regulatory authority, whoever decides on vaccination programs. In the UK, they've just approved 16 to 18-year-olds. They'd be very cautious about vaccinating. I think because there's myocarditis problem about vaccinating 12 to 16-year-olds. In the US, they've already vaccinated about 6 to 8 million kids over the age of 12, and have got good data that it's safe. So it depends on the local decision making in each country, and there doesn't seem to be an international consensus on it. And under 12 will depend on further studies being done, which are underway. But that's something which will be for not the next few months.
Okay, and our last question from Andrew. If you are vaccinated, could that trigger a positive result when using the new quick tests?
No.
Simple answer. Fantastic. Okay. Oh, hold on. Let's just see if there's anything else in chat. No. Okay. I think we're done. I think we're pretty much done. I think it's all I should do is thank both Nicks for their time. Fantastic. Fantastic. It's great actually to have access and to be able to talk to and pose questions to, you know, the scientific community. We see so much in the media out there, which is speculative or speculation, and seems to be printed here without challenge, no matter who says it. And the more left field, the higher the status the person who says it, the more it seems to be believed. Yeah, thank you both, Nick Day and Nick White, for your time. It's fantastic that you were able to take this time with us. And thank you everybody for joining the webinar in such large numbers.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks, everybody.
All the
Bye.
best. Stay well.